Overlooked in her father's will, she was given the old, worthless barn. But what she discovered sealed beneath its floorboards would change her life forever. If you believe that our true inheritance isn't always about money, but about the stories that set us free, then I think you're in the right place. Go ahead and subscribe, and let's walk this path together. The story I'm about to tell you started on the day I turned 18, the day I officially aged out of the system and into a world that felt colder and more indifferent than any institution I'd ever known. It also started in a lawyer's office that smelled of expensive leather and quiet judgment. The chair I was sitting in was worth more than everything I owned, which at that point consisted of a duffel bag of clothes and a worn-out copy of a book my mother had given me before she was gone. Mr. Alistair Finch, my late father's attorney, looked at me over a pair of half-moon glasses that seemed permanently attached to the bridge of his nose. He was a man made of straight lines and quiet sighs. His suit was gray, his hair was gray, and his expression was a carefully neutral shade of gray that I'd learned to recognize as pity. I'd been seeing it my whole life. From social workers, from foster parents, from teachers who knew my file. It was a look that said, "You poor thing, you never had a chance." I hated it more than anything. I'd been summoned to his office for the reading of my father's will. A man I barely remembered, a ghost who flickered in the background of my earliest memories, smelling of sawdust and wintergreen. He'd passed away 6 months prior, a fact I'd learned from a sterile, formal letter forwarded by my last caseworker. There was no phone call, no gentle breaking of the news, just a piece of paper informing me that the man whose DNA I carried was no longer in the world. I hadn't cried. It's hard to grieve someone who was already a ghost to you. But sitting in that silent, intimidating office, a strange, hollow ache began to grow in my chest. My father's other family was there too. His wife, a woman named Sharon who looked right through me as if I were a smudge on the window, and their 2 sons, my half-brothers. They were older, probably in their late 20s, dressed in clothes that fit them perfectly, their faces smooth with the easy confidence of men who had never wanted for anything. They didn't look at me either. I was an inconvenient footnote in their father's past, a loose end they were legally obligated to witness being tied up. The air was thick with a tension I couldn't name, but it felt ancient and heavy, like the dust on forgotten furniture. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Mr. Robert Thorne," he began, his voice a dry rustle of paper. He read through the legal jargon, a river of words that meant nothing to me. He spoke of trusts and stocks and bonds, of a primary residence and a vacation property on a lake. My half-brothers, Peter and Mark, received significant shares in my father's successful construction company. Sharon, his wife, received the main house, the lake house, and a financial portfolio that made her nod with quiet, dignified satisfaction. It was all very neat, very clean. The distribution of a life's work among the people who had shared that life. And then there was me. Mr. Finch paused and adjusted his glasses, finally allowing his gaze to land on me for more than a fleeting second. The pity was back, thicker this time. "To my daughter, Ilara Vance," he read, my mother's last name, the one I'd carried through a dozen foster homes, "whom I failed in life but hope to provide for in some small way. I leave the barn, located on the northeast corner of the primary estate, and all of its contents. May she find it of some value." The room was silent. A barn. Not the land it sat on, just the structure itself, and its contents. I could feel the smirk from my half-brothers without even looking at them. It was a joke. A final, posthumous slap in the face. A worthless, dilapidated building full of old junk, a token gesture to tick a legal box and clear a guilty conscience. I imagined it was probably full of rusted tools, rotting hay, and rat nests. Sharon actually let out a small, almost inaudible scoff, a little puff of air that said everything. See? You got exactly what you deserve. Nothing. I didn't react. 2 years in the system, bouncing between homes where I was either invisible or a problem, had taught me how to build a wall inside myself. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sting of humiliation, but on the outside, I was a statue. I just stared at a point on the polished mahogany desk, focusing on the way the light from the window reflected off its surface. I willed myself not to cry. Not here, not in front of them. Mr. Finch slid a large, yellowed envelope across the desk toward me. "This contains the deed to the structure and a key," he said, his voice softer now. "The terms of the will stipulate that you must remove the barn from the property within 90 days, or it becomes forfeit and will be demolished by the estate." Of course, there was always a catch. I couldn't even keep the useless building. I had to pay to have it moved. A girl with less than $100 to her name was supposed to arrange the transportation of an entire barn. The absurdity of it was almost funny. It was a perfectly constructed insult, designed to be impossible. I reached out and took the envelope. My hand was steady, my face was blank. I stood up, the leather of the chair sighing as I left it. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," I said, my voice surprisingly even. I didn't look at Sharon or her sons. I didn't exist to them, and right then, I was glad for it. I turned and walked out of the office, down the long, carpeted hallway, past portraits of stern-faced men who looked like they'd never been young. I didn't let the tears fall until I was miles away, huddled in the corner of a city bus, the cold glass of the window pressed against my forehead. The envelope felt heavy in my lap. A key to a barn. A deed to a pile of rotting wood. It was the sum total of my inheritance. And for some reason, despite the humiliation, despite the anger, a tiny, stubborn seed of curiosity began to sprout in the barren soil of my heart. What were its contents? Why this specific, bizarre bequest? My father, the ghost, had left me a riddle. And I, with nothing to my name and nowhere to go, decided I was going to solve it. The decision to go was less a decision and more a lack of any other option. I had aged out. My room at the group home, which had been the closest thing to a stable environment I'd had in years, was already being prepared for the next kid in line. I had 72 hours to clear out my things. My caseworker, a tired woman named Brenda with a kind but overwhelmed heart, had given me a list of shelters and a voucher for a week at a hostel. My future was a series of question marks, a fog I couldn't see through. The barn was the only solid thing I had, even if it was a joke. It was a place, a destination. So I spent my last $97 on a one-way bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of called Northwood, the closest stop to my father's estate. I packed my life into the same black duffel bag I'd been carrying since I was 14. It didn't take long. A few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, the worn paperback, and the big yellow envelope from the lawyer. That was it. The entire material evidence of my 18 years on Earth. The bus ride was long, stretching over 7 hours. I watched the city skyline dissolve into sprawling suburbs, which then bled into flat, anonymous highways, and finally narrowed into 2-lane country roads. The world outside my window grew quieter, emptier. The concrete and steel gave way to bare trees clawing at a white sky, their branches like black veins. Fields lay dormant under a thin blanket of old, crusty snow. It was the kind of landscape that made you feel small and forgotten, which suited my mood perfectly. I didn't listen to music. I just sat with the low rumble of the engine and the hiss of the tires on the cold asphalt, letting my thoughts drift. I tried to remember my father. The memories were like faded photographs, blurry and incomplete. I remembered the scent of sawdust in his workshop, a place I was never allowed to enter, but whose smell clung to his clothes. I remembered the low rumble of his voice, but not the words he said. I remembered him lifting me up once to see a bird's nest in a high branch, my small hands gripping his thick, calloused fingers. It was a good memory, maybe the only one I had. But it was followed by a darker, more confusing one, the day he dropped me off with a woman I didn't know, promising he'd be back soon. He knelt down, his face tight with an emotion I couldn't understand. He told me to be a good girl. He never came back. Soon after, the system swallowed me whole. For years, I'd told myself I hated him. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. Hating him gave my pain a target. It explained the emptiness, the feeling of being unwanted that had shadowed my entire childhood. He had a new family, a better family, and he'd thrown me away like an old toy. The will seemed to confirm it. His sons got his legacy. I got his garbage. But the final line of the bequest echoed in my mind. May she find it of some value. Was it just a hollow phrase, a last-minute addition to soften the blow, or was there something more to it? The bus groaned to a halt in what appeared to be the center of Northwood. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a diner with a flickering neon sign, and a general store with a wooden porch. I stepped off the bus into the biting, late afternoon air. The cold was sharp, clean, and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was a world away from the city's exhaust-filled haze. I was the only person who got off. The bus driver gave me a curious look, then shut the door with a pneumatic sigh, leaving me alone in the immense quiet. I pulled my thin jacket tighter around me and looked at the address on the envelope. According to the map on my phone, which was quickly losing its battery, the estate was about 3 miles down the main road. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no other buses. There was just the road, stretching out into the gray distance. So I started walking. The walk was colder and longer than I'd anticipated. The sun was a pale wafer, already sinking toward the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow. My cheap boots weren't meant for this kind of weather, and I could feel the damp chill seeping into my socks. Cars passed me every few minutes, their occupants anonymous figures who probably wondered what a girl with a duffel bag was doing walking down a country road in the middle of winter. I kept my head down, my breath pluming in front of me. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A long, white fence and a grand stone gate with the name Thorn elegantly carved into the archway. The gate was open. A driveway, lined with perfectly spaced, mature trees, led to a large, modern house that looked like something out of a magazine. It was all glass and dark wood, with warm light glowing from within. I could see figures moving inside, Sharon and my half-brothers, living their lives in their home. My home was supposed to be somewhere around here, too. I walked past the grand entrance, following the fence line. The property was huge. The fence seemed to go on forever. Finally, around a bend in the road, I saw it. Tucked away in a corner of the vast property, almost hidden by a stand of overgrown pine trees, was the barn. It was exactly as I'd pictured, only worse. It was a classic gambrel-roofed barn, but its red paint was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The roof on one side sagged dangerously, and several windows were boarded up or broken. It looked sad and abandoned, a forgotten relic from another time. It slumped against the gray sky like an old man with a broken back. This was it, my inheritance. A wave of bitter disappointment washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. It was a ruin, a pile of garbage just waiting for a strong wind to knock it down. The 90-day demolition clause suddenly seemed less like a threat and more like a mercy. I trudged through the unbroken snow toward it, my boots sinking deep. The air grew colder as I got closer, as if the barn itself was radiating a deep, ancient chill. There was a large, sliding door on the front, held shut by a thick chain and a heavy, rust-covered padlock. I fumbled in the envelope, my fingers numb and clumsy with cold. The key was there, large and made of old, tarnished brass. It looked like something from a pirate movie. It slid into the padlock with a grating sound. For a moment, it wouldn't turn. I put my whole body into it, gritting my teeth, and with a final, protesting shriek of metal, the lock clicked open. The chain fell away, clanking against the frozen ground. The door was heavy. I had to plant my feet and push with my shoulder, groaning with the effort. It slid open a few feet with a deep, grinding rumble that echoed in the profound silence of the evening. I peered into the darkness within. The air that rolled out was thick and musty, smelling of decay, dust, and time itself. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed for a very long time. I hesitated for a moment on the threshold, a primal fear prickling the back of my neck. I was alone, miles from anyone who knew my name, about to step into a dark, decrepit building on a property owned by people who hated me. It felt like the beginning of a horror movie. But then I thought of the hostel, the shelters, the endless series of temporary rooms that had defined my life. This place, as wretched as it was mine. At least for the next 89 days. I took a deep breath, hitched my duffel bag higher on my shoulder, and stepped inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind me. The darkness was absolute. I fumbled for my phone, its screen flaring to life with a pathetic 5% battery warning. I turned on the flashlight, and the narrow beam cut a path through the gloom. The inside was cavernous. Dust motes, thick as insects, danced in the beam of light. The floor was packed earth in some places, covered with rotting planks in others. Old, rusted farm equipment lay scattered about like the bones of prehistoric animals. Cobwebs, thick and heavy as cotton candy, draped from the high rafters. In the center of the vast space, everything was covered in white sheets, creating a lumpy, ghostly landscape. I walked forward, my footsteps unnervingly loud. I pulled back one of the sheets. Underneath was a stack of old furniture, a beautiful, hand-carved wooden chest, a dusty rocking chair, a table with elegantly turned legs. It was old, but it was quality. I pulled back another sheet. More furniture. Another. Stacks of canvases, their faces turned to the wall. My father, I vaguely recalled someone saying, had been a painter in his youth, before he took over the family business. I walked deeper into the barn, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. It was cold, so cold I could see my breath, but the sheer amount of stuff was overwhelming. It wasn't just junk, it was a life, packed up and stored away. Then I saw it. Sitting alone in the very center of the barn, on a section of floor that was made of newer-looking wooden planks, was a heavy, dark green metal footlocker. Unlike everything else, it wasn't covered in a sheet or a thick layer of dust. It was clean, as if it had been wiped down recently. It had a heavy-duty clasp, but there was no padlock on it. It just sat there, waiting. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was different. This felt deliberate. I knelt in front of it, the cold from the floor seeping through my jeans. My phone chose that exact moment to die, plunging me back into absolute blackness. For a long moment, I didn't move. The darkness was total, a physical presence that pressed in on me. The only sound was my own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of my heart. The musty smell of the barn seemed to intensify, filling my lungs. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in my throat. I was alone, in the dark, in a collapsing building, with a dead phone and no way to call for help. The smart thing to do would be to find the door, get out, and walk back to town, even if it meant sleeping in the bus station. But the image of that clean, green footlocker was burned into my mind. It was the one thing in this entire place that didn't belong to the past. It felt present. I took a few deep, calming breaths, the way Brenda had taught me. "You're okay, Alara," I whispered. the sounds swallowed by the cavernous space. You're okay. I began to feel my way forward with my hands, my fingers brushing against dusty sheets and cold, hard metal. My eyes started to adjust, the faint gray light filtering through the grimy, broken windows providing just enough illumination to see shapes and shadows. I found the footlocker again, its solid form a reassuring anchor in the gloom. I ran my hands over its surface. It was cold, smooth steel. My fingers found the clasp. It was stiff, but it wasn't locked. I lifted it. It made a sharp click that echoed through the barn. I held my breath and lifted the lid. It opened with a soft, metallic sigh. I couldn't see what was inside, but I could smell it. The scent of paper, ink, and something else. A faint, familiar scent I couldn't quite place. Wintergreen. My breath hitched. I reached inside, my fingers brushing against a smooth, leather-bound book. Beneath it, there was a stack of thick envelopes, tied together with a simple piece of string. I lifted the book out. It was a journal. I opened it to the first page. Even in the dim light, I could make out the bold, slightly messy handwriting. For Ilara. My name, written in my father's hand. My fingers trembled as I traced the letters. This was for me, all of this. The barn, the strange bequest, this box. It wasn't an insult, it was a map. He had left me a map, and I was standing at the beginning of it. I had to find a light. I remembered the old farm equipment I'd seen. There had to be a lantern, something, anything. I fumbled my way around the perimeter of the barn, my hands running along the rough wooden walls. My fingers snagged on something cold and metallic, a hook. Hanging from it was an old storm lantern, the glass cloudy with grime. I took it down, my heart hammering with a mixture of hope and fear. I could feel that it still had fuel in it, sloshing around inside. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't have matches. The thought was deflating. Then I remembered the duffel bag. I always carried a cheap disposable lighter, a habit I'd picked up for no good reason other than feeling like it was a useful thing to have. I stumbled back to where I'd dropped my bag, my hands sweeping across the floor until I found it. I unzipped the side pocket, and my fingers closed around the familiar plastic shape. I went back to the lantern. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the lighter to spark. On the 3rd try, a tiny flame flickered to life, a brave little soldier in the overwhelming dark. I carefully lifted the glass of the lantern and touched the flame to the wick. It sputtered for a second, then caught, blooming into a steady, warm, golden light. The light pushed back the shadows, filling the barn with a soft, dancing glow. The space was no longer menacing. It was still old and dusty, but now it felt sacred, like a cathedral of forgotten things. I carried the lantern back to the green footlocker and sat down on the floor, crossing my legs. I placed the lantern beside me, its light illuminating the pages of the journal. I took a deep breath, and I began to read. My dearest Ilara, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means several things. It means I am gone. It means you have survived the wretched system I condemned you to. And it means you were curious enough and brave enough to come to this old, forgotten place. For that, I am more proud than you can ever know. I know you must hate me. You have every right to. I abandoned you. I let you grow up believing you were unwanted. There is no excuse for this, only a reason. And the reason is what this barn and this letter is all about. I need you to listen, Ilara. Not with your anger, but with the open heart I know you still have, buried under all those scars. I had to stop. The words were a physical blow. I could feel the walls I'd built so carefully over the years begin to crack. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. When your mother died, my world fell apart. But my wife's family, the Sharons, saw it as an opportunity. They had never approved of your mother or of you. They controlled the family business, and they gave me an ultimatum. I could either give you up, let you be quietly absorbed into the foster system, and in return, they would allow me to one day take over the company and secure a future for my other sons. Or I could fight for you, and they would use their power and their money to ruin me, take the company, and ensure that neither you nor I would have anything. They would have painted me as an unfit, grieving widower, and they would have won. I was a coward, Ilara. I chose the path of least resistance. I chose their money over my own daughter. It is the single greatest regret of my life, a shame that has haunted every moment of my existence since. The lantern light flickered, casting my shadow, huge and distorted, against the far wall. I could feel hot tears welling in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I had to know the rest. But I made a promise to myself that day, the letter continued. I would play their game. I would build the business. I would make the money. But none of it would be for them. All of it, every secret hour of work, every deal, every bit of profit I could skim and hide away, would be for you. This barn became my secret vault, my real office. I spent years, decades, slowly moving things here. Not just money, but the things that mattered. Your mother's paintings, the furniture our grandfather built, the things that hold our real family history, not the cold, sterile version that lives in that house. I built a life for you in secret, right under their noses. The will was a performance, my dear, a final act of misdirection. Giving you this worthless barn was the only way I could give you everything. I set the journal down, my hands trembling. The words echoed in the vast, silent space. The only way I could give you everything. The air in my lungs felt thick, heavy. I looked around the barn, at the sheet-covered shapes, the dusty relics, the forgotten corners. This wasn't a tomb of junk, it was an ark. A secret repository of a life I was never allowed to have. My father hadn't thrown me away, he had hidden me. He had hidden his love for me here, in this cold, dilapidated place, protecting it, nurturing it in the dark. The tears I'd been holding back for years finally came. They weren't the hot tears of anger and humiliation I'd felt in the lawyer's office. These were tears of profound, earth-shattering grief. I cried for the little girl left alone in a stranger's house. I cried for the teenager who built walls of anger to keep the hurt at bay. I cried for the father who had lived a double life, torn apart by cowardice and love. I cried for the years we'd lost, the conversations we'd never had, the life we were supposed to share. I pulled my knees to my chest and sobbed, my shoulders shaking with the force of it. The sound was raw and ugly, torn from a place deep inside me that I thought had died long ago. The barn seemed to hold the sound, absorbing my grief into its old, weary bones. For the first time, I wasn't crying because I was unwanted. I was crying because I had been loved all along, loved so fiercely and so secretly that I never even knew it. When the storm of tears finally passed, I was left feeling empty, scoured out, but also strangely calm. The hollow ache in my chest was still there, but it was different now. It was filled with a story, a new story, my story. I picked up the journal again, my fingers smudging the ink where a tear had fallen. The letter continued. Now, for the practical part, the part that will give you the freedom you deserve. The money they think they inherited is only a fraction of my true worth. The rest is here, with you. But you will have to work for it, one last time. Under the floorboards where you found this box, there is a small, hollow space I constructed. It's well hidden. You will need to pry up the planks. You'll find a crowbar hanging on the west wall, near the old workbench. It will be hard work, but you are my daughter. You are strong. Be careful. Be smart. Trust no one, especially not Alistair Finch. He is a good man, but he is their man. This is for you, and you alone. Use it to build a life your mother would have been proud of. Buy back the land this barn sits on. Or travel the world. Go to college. Do whatever you want. Be free, Ilara. That is my final wish. Your loving father, Robert. I closed the journal and sat in the flickering lantern light, the weight of his words settling over me. He had left me a choice. I could take this story, this truth, and walk away. I could go back to the city and try to make a life with $100 I didn't spend on the bus ticket. Or I could believe him. I could pick up a crowbar and start tearing this place apart, chasing a ghost's promise. For a moment, the doubt crept back in. What if this was some cruel, elaborate joke? What if I tore up the floor and found nothing but dirt and rocks? The humiliation would be absolute. I would be a fool, talking to ghosts in a ruined barn. But then I looked at his handwriting, at the way he wrote my name. I thought of the scent of wintergreen. It was real. This feeling, this story, was the most real thing I had ever known. And I want to pause here for a second, because maybe you've had a moment like this in your life. A moment where you're standing at a crossroads, and one path is easy and familiar, even if it's painful, and the other path is terrifying and uncertain, but it holds the whisper of a promise, a chance for something more. Maybe it wasn't a barn and a secret inheritance, but a job offer in a new city, the end of a bad relationship, or just the decision to finally face a truth you've been running from. If you've ever been there, or if you're there right now, let me know in the comments. I read them all. Because in that moment, I realized that the real inheritance wasn't just about what might be under the floor. It was about choosing to believe in a better story for myself. It was about choosing hope over despair. Okay, let's get back to it. I sat there in the cold, the lantern light painting the world in gold and shadow, and I made my choice. A new kind of energy started to fill me, pushing out the cold and the exhaustion. It was determination. It was purpose. For the first time in my life, I had a mission. I stood up, my joints stiff from the cold floor, and picked up the lantern. His instructions were clear. Crowbar, west wall, workbench. I scanned the barn, the light cutting through the gloom. The west wall was cluttered with old tools hanging on pegs, their shapes creating a complex silhouette. I made my way over, stepping carefully over debris. There was the workbench he mentioned, a heavy, solid table covered in a thick layer of dust. And hanging above it, just as he'd said, was a long, heavy crowbar, its metal a dull gray. I took it down. It was heavy, solid, real. This was the key to the next part of the puzzle. I went back to the center of the barn, to the clean patch of newer-looking floorboards. I placed the lantern on the ground, its light pooling around the area. I knelt down and examined the planks. They were well fitted, the seams tight. There was no obvious handle or loose board. He had hidden it well. I wedged the forked end of the crowbar into a thin crack between two of the planks. I put my weight on it. The wood groaned in protest, but it didn't budge. I tried again, pushing down with all my strength. A sharp cracking sound echoed in the barn, and a piece of the plank splintered. It was going to be harder than I thought. I took off my jacket, the cold air immediately biting at my arms, but I knew I would be warm soon enough. I repositioned the crowbar, found a better point of leverage, and threw my entire body into it. There was a loud screech of nails pulling free from old wood, and one end of the plank lifted a few inches. A puff of dry, earthy-smelling air escaped from beneath. My heart leaped. He was telling the truth. I worked the crowbar back and forth, and with a final, splintering crack, the first plank came free. I tossed it aside. Beneath it was just darkness. I shone the lantern's light into the hole. It wasn't just dirt. There was a cavity, about 3 feet deep, lined with thick plastic sheeting. It was a vault. A makeshift, hand-dug, hidden vault. I worked with a feverish intensity now, the cold forgotten, the ache in my muscles ignored. One by one, I pried the heavy planks up, the sounds of shrieking nails and cracking wood filling the silent barn. It was brutal, physical work. My hands grew raw, and sweat beaded on my forehead, but I didn't stop. With each board I removed, my world expanded. My story got bigger. This was the work he said I'd have to do. This was my contribution to my own rescue. After what felt like an hour, I had created a large opening in the floor, about 6 feet square. And there, nestled in the dark earthen vault, were a series of large, waterproof containers. They were heavy-duty plastic tubs, the kind you might use for camping or storage, each one sealed tight with locking handles. There were 5 of them. 5 chests in my father's secret treasure vault. My hands were shaking again, but this time from adrenaline, not fear. I reached down and grabbed the handle of the first one. It was heavy, heavier than I expected. I grunted with effort as I hauled it up out of the hole and onto the barn floor. It was sealed with duct tape around the lid, an extra layer of protection. I used the sharp end of the crowbar to slice through the tape and then pop the latches. I lifted the lid. I think I stopped breathing. The container was filled with cash. Bundles of it, neatly wrapped in paper bands, 50s and 100s. More money than I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I reached in and touched it. The paper was crisp, real. I lifted a bundle. Stamped on the band was the number $10,000, and the container was full of them. I just stared, my mind unable to process the scale of it. This was life-changing, world-altering money. This was freedom. This was a future. I slowly closed the lid, my mind reeling. 1 container. There were 4 more. I pulled the second one out. It was just as heavy. I opened it. More money. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. It was too much. It was absurd. It was wonderful. I hauled out the 3rd and 4th containers. Both were filled to the brim with cash. I was sitting in a ruined barn, surrounded by a fortune. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. But there was still 1 more container, the 5th one. I pulled it out. It felt different. It was lighter than the others. I opened it with a sense of trepidation. This one wasn't full of money. It was full of paper. On top was another bundle of envelopes, tied with string, thicker than the first one. Beneath them were legal documents, deeds, titles, and certificates. And at the very bottom was a single, sealed manila envelope with 1 word written on it: Sharon. My breath caught in my throat. I picked up the bundle of letters. These were addressed to me, written in the same hand. These were the rest of the story. The money was the means, but this, I knew, was the real treasure. The truth. I didn't touch the money again. I didn't even count it. The number didn't matter. What mattered were the letters. I sat back down on the cold floor, pulled an old dusty blanket from the nearby rocking chair, and wrapped it around my shoulders. I arranged the lantern so its golden light fell on the pages, and I untied the string from the thick bundle of letters. Each one was dated. They spanned 15 years. He had been writing to me my whole life. I started with the oldest one, written just a week after he'd left me. His handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places, as if he'd been crying as he wrote. He told me about the crushing silence of the house, how he kept thinking he heard my footsteps in the hall. He told me he'd made a terrible mistake, but he was too deep in the trap to escape. He promised he would find a way to make it right. I read for hours, the world outside the barn disappearing completely. The sun set and the temperature dropped, but I didn't notice. I was lost in his words, living a life I never knew existed. I was traveling back in time, watching my own life unfold through his heartbroken eyes. He had followed me. He'd hired a private investigator, a discreet one, to keep track of me. He knew every foster home, every school. He wrote about my first-grade teacher, Mrs. Gable, who told the investigator I was a bright but quiet child. He knew I'd won a spelling bee in 3rd grade. He knew I'd broken my arm falling out of a tree when I was 12. He had a photograph of me, a grainy, long-distance shot of me sitting on a park bench, reading a book. Under it, he had written, "Just like her mother." He had been a ghost, but he had been there, a silent, unseen guardian. His letters were a chronicle of his secret war. He detailed how he'd skimmed profits, setting up shell accounts, slowly bleeding the company his father-in-law had built, diverting its lifeblood to my future. He described late nights in this barn, which he'd secretly bought from a neighboring farmer years ago, transferring funds, hiding cash, building my inheritance piece by piece, right under the noses of the family who lived in the brightly lit house just a few hundred yards away. They thought he was working late for them, to secure their legacy. In reality, he was working for me. He wrote about his other sons, Peter and Mark. He loved them in his own way, but he saw how their grandfather's money and their mother's ambition had poisoned them, made them entitled and weak. They have everything, and they value nothing, he wrote in one letter. I am giving you nothing, so you will value everything. And then there was the final envelope, the one marked Sharon. My hand trembled as I picked it up. This was the weapon, the part of the plan that went beyond just giving me money. The last letter in the bundle explained it. Elara, this last part is a choice, and it's a difficult one. What is in this envelope is proof. Proof of everything. Financial records, evidence of tax evasion and fraud on a massive scale, all committed by Sharon's father and covered up by her. For years, they used this secret to control me. If I ever stepped out of line, they would have exposed it and let me take the fall. I have spent the last decade gathering my own proof, turning their weapon back on them. If you give this envelope to the authorities, it will ruin them. The company will collapse. The house, the stocks, everything they hold dear will be gone. They will be left with nothing. It would be justice. It would be revenge. But it would also be cruel. It is a heavy power I am giving you, the power to destroy them as they destroyed us. You can use it, or you can burn it. You can choose justice, or you can choose mercy. I cannot make that choice for you. I made the wrong choice once out of fear. I trust you will make the right one out of strength. Whatever you decide, I will be proud of you. I put the letter down, my mind spinning. He had given me a fortune, a history, and a bomb. I held the power to obliterate the family that had cast me aside. I thought of Sharon's smug face in the lawyer's office, the contempt in her eyes. I thought of my half-brothers and their silent smirks. A dark, satisfying part of me wanted to see them fall. I wanted them to know what it felt like to have everything taken away, to be left with nothing but a key to a worthless building. But then I thought about my father's words. I trust you will make the right one out of strength. Vengeance felt like strength, but was it? Or was it just another kind of prison? Destroying them wouldn't bring back the lost years. It wouldn't let me have one more conversation with my father. It would just create more pain, more ruin. I looked around the barn, at the legacy he had truly left me. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the weapon. It was the story, the truth. He had spent his life trapped by their greed and his own mistake. He didn't want me to be trapped too, not even by a quest for revenge. He wanted me to be free. And freedom, I was beginning to realize, was about letting go. It was about choosing to build something new, not tearing down the old. I held the envelope marked Sharon in my hands. I thought about what to do. The sun was beginning to rise, casting pale gray light through the broken windows. A new day was starting. I spent the night in the cold barn, but I had never felt less alone. I had found my father. I had found my story. And now, I knew what I had to do. Morning arrived, crisp and clear. The rising sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. I was stiff, cold, and exhausted, but I was also filled with a profound sense of clarity. I had a plan. First, I carefully repacked the containers. I put the bundles of letters back in their box, a treasure more valuable than all the cash combined. I left the money where it was, hidden beneath the floorboards. It was safe there, for now. Then I took the envelope marked Sharon. I walked to the large sliding door and pushed it open. The morning air was like a clean slate. I walked out into the bright, cold day, the envelope in my hand. I could see the main house, a plume of smoke rising from its chimney. They were waking up, starting their day, oblivious to the fact that their entire world was resting in my palm. I could walk over there, knock on their door, and watch their lives crumble. I could mail the envelope to the IRS and let justice run its cold, indifferent course. But my father's words echoed in my mind. Choose mercy. I found a rusty old burn barrel near the side of the barn. I took out the lighter from my pocket, the same one that had given me light in the darkness. I held the flame to the corner of the envelope. It caught slowly at first, then flared to life, the orange flames greedily consuming the paper. I dropped it into the barrel and watched it burn. I watched the proof, the power, the revenge turn to black, curling ash. As the last embers died out, a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. I was free. Not just from the system, but from the anger, from the past. My father had bought my future. The least I could do was let go of his war. I went back inside the barn. I found a piece of cardboard and a marker he'd left on the workbench. I wrote a simple message. Then I walked the 3 miles back to town. The walk felt different this time. I wasn't a lost girl with nowhere to go. I was a woman with a purpose. I had a fortune hidden in a barn, but more than that, I had a story that made sense of my life. I found the diner I'd seen the day before and ordered the biggest breakfast they had. As I ate, I used their phone to make a call. The phone rang twice before a familiar dry voice answered. Finch speaking. Mr. Finch, I said, my voice clear and steady. This is Alara Vance. There was a pause. I could almost hear him shifting in his expensive chair. Miss Vance, is there a problem? No problem at all, I said. I'm calling to make an offer. I'd like to buy the land the barn sits on, the 5 acres on the northeast corner of the estate, and I'd like you to represent me. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I could picture his face, the carefully neutral mask slipping for just a second. I see, he finally managed. Miss Vance, with all due respect, that parcel of land is quite valuable. Are you sure you have I have the funds, I said, cutting him off gently. And I'm prepared to make a very generous offer. An offer the estate would be foolish to refuse, especially given their current financial situation, which I imagine isn't quite as robust as they believe. That got his attention. I had learned from my father's letters that the construction company was over-leveraged, a house of cards my father had been propping up for years. Without him, it was vulnerable. Sharon and her sons would need cash, and soon. I let him connect the dots. Draw up the papers, Mr. Finch, I said. I'll be waiting. I hung up the phone. A few minutes later, a local man came into the diner. He saw me and nodded. You the one who called about the sign? I am, I said. He handed me a piece of paper. It was a receipt for his services. I paid him in cash. Later that day, as I took the bus back to the city to start the process of building my new life, I imagined Sharon or one of my brothers driving past the old barn. I imagined them seeing the new sign I'd had posted on the fence. A professionally made sign hammered into the frozen ground. It read, Private property, no trespassing. Future site of the Thorne Arts Foundation, in memory of Robert Thorne. The barn wasn't my inheritance, it was my headquarters. The money wasn't the treasure, it was the tool. My father had given me a second chance, and I was going to use it to build something that honored the man he truly was, the artist, the secret protector. I was going to turn his secret vault into a beacon. And that's the story of how a worthless barn made me the wealthiest person I know. Not because of the money, but because it gave me back my past and handed me my future. It taught me that sometimes, the things we think are punishments are actually gifts in disguise. The things that look like endings are really just the beginning. And the most valuable inheritance is a story that sets you free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever found value where others saw none, or if you've ever had to choose between justice and mercy, I hope you'll consider subscribing and joining our community. Share your own story in the comments below. I truly believe that by sharing our stories, we help each other heal, and we realize we're not alone in our struggles. Your story matters. Thank you for being here.